Today's daf we're going to be learning is Zevachim daf Ayin Vav. It's the daf for Shabbat. We're going to get started from the Mishnah on the previous daf. So we saw the Mishnah had said that if you have two animals, an asham and a shlamim, right, that were designated, and then they got mixed up, and we don't know which is for which. So Rabbi Shimon said you can slaughter them both and just do the chumrah of each of them, right, which is going to basically limit its eating for a day and a night instead of the shlamim, which theoretically might have been more. And the rabbi said, no, you can't do that because you might actually end up burning kachim if you leave it over when actually it might be shlamim and you might be allowed to eat it still then. And the rabbis are bothered by that. Rabbi Shimon seems not to be bothered. The second case in the Mishnah was if you have pieces of meat that were already prepared that were kachim and kachim kalim, then even the rabbis agree. There's really nothing you can do about it, that you leave it and you can eat them and you just have to be strict and eat them within the time frame for the shorter amount of time. So then we had a braita that they brought in front of Rav that talked about shvi, that you can't buy with shmita money that you sold shmita produce for, which has the sanctity of shvi on it. You can't buy truma because you're actually limiting truma. It's going to have to be burnt at a certain point when there's nothing else left in the fields. And the rabbi said to Rava, oh, this seems like not Rabbi Shimon. And Rava said, what do you mean? It is Rabbi Shimon, because Rabbi Shimon only allowed in the Mishnah because it was b'di'evet. It was post facto. It was already done. They were already mixed up. But not, can I go out and take my money and go buy truma? I can't do that. Lechatchila, as we say. Ab initio. So, that was what we had. To which the Gemara says, wait a minute. Lechatchila lo? Really? Rabbi Shimon doesn't allow it lechatchila? He seems to allow it. And we're going to bring 4 sources that all seem to indicate that he does allow it. First two are going to be brought by Abaye, then Rav Yosef's going to talk to Abaye and say, hey, why didn't you mention this one when you were questioning Rava? And then we're going to have a 4th. So, Eiti ve'Abaye. V'kulan rasha'im kohanim l'shanot b'achilatam. When it comes to all these korbanot, the kohanim can change the way they're eaten. They can do it any way they want. Lochlan tzluin, shlukinu mevushalim. There's a Mishnah later on in Zevachim. They can eat it cooked in any manner they want. V'latet l'tochan tavlei chulim v'tavlei truma. This is the important part. You can spice it with even truma spices. Divrei Rabbi Shimon. It says Rabbi Yishmael, it should be Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon allows you to put truma spices in. Now, if you put truma spices and you cook the meat with the truma spices, what's going to happen? It's going to be limited in how long you can eat them for. So you're basically causing truma to be disqualified because it's going to be by the next day if it's kachim, by the day after that if it's kachim kalim, to be burned. So Amalei, Rava answered, don't question me with this. Hanach l'truma tavlin de Rabbanan. Truma on spices is only rabbinic. So, therefore, I'm not worried about disqualifying truma that's only rabbinic. I'm talking about Torah level truma. So, basically, you could still say that Rabbi Shimon allows that, but that's because it's not really truma d'oraita, truma by Torah law. Because truma, and we're going to talk about this in a minute also, truma is only on dagan tirosh and yitzhar by Torah law. It's on grains, grape products, wine and grapes, and on olive oil. So, next source. Eitive. Ein lukchim truma b'kesef maaser. You have maaser sheni money, which is, I have my produce and I'm supposed to bring it to Jerusalem. Instead of bringing it to Jerusalem, I redeem it on coins. I bring my coins to Jerusalem. I'm allowed to buy food. I have to buy food in Jerusalem and things that I can eat and then eat them in Jerusalem. But I can't buy truma with it. Why is that? Because I'm limiting what I can eat. Meaning, okay, so here, achilata is feminine, is referring back to the truma. Truma, I can eat anywhere I want. But now that it's maser, I can only eat it in Jerusalem. And there's another law that an onen, someone whose relative died and they haven't buried them yet, can't eat maser. So you're limiting also who can eat it, even though it's a small limitation, because how often does that happen to people? But it's a limitation. Also, Jerusalem is a really bigger one. Some people have the girsa b'achilato. It's actually a Maser Sheni issue because now instead of everyone can eat it, now you're limiting it because it's truma to only the kohanim. Some people say it's actually you're limiting both b'achilata and b'achilato, and it's both of them are limiting, and that's why it's a problem. Either which way, there's a limitation here. Now it's a little bit different. You're not actually disqualifying, but you are limiting who can eat it, and when it can be eaten or where it can be eaten and all that. Not as much when, but where. But Rabbi Shimon matil, what do you see here? Rabbi Shimon permits, so that seems like lechatchila, it's fine. And in fact, ishtikle. Okay, because here it's a matter of I go to Jerusalem, I have my money, I can buy anything I want. That's ab initio. And Ishtiklei Rava didn't know how to answer. This is the only one we're not going to actually have an answer for. Next scene, we see Abai going to Rav Yosef, Ki ata l'kamei to Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef was his rabbi. When he gets to Rav Yosef, Amar le, Rav Yosef hears, he told him about the discussion he had with Rava. Amai lo totve meha, why didn't you bring a question from here? Okay, a Mishnah in Shvi'it. Ein mevashlin yarach shel Shvi'it b'shemen shel truma. You can't cook a vegetable of Shemitah with oil of truma. Because what's going to happen? Again, this is the Truma Shemitah mix, like in the first source, right? That we saw before in the previous daf, that they said, this doesn't sound like Rabbi Shimon. We said, it is Rabbi Shimon, because Rabbi Shimon, right? That was, Rabbi Shimon doesn't even allow it lechatchila, but look, here it says, you can't cook a yarak of shvid and shemen of truma, Rabbi Shimon matil, Rabbi Shimon permits. Sounds like ab initio, right? You have Shemitah, vegetable, you have oil of truma, don't cook them together. It sounds like they're separate, and you want to know, can you cook them together? So Rabbi Yosef says to Abai, why didn't you ask this question? Amar le Abaye, filav miyotvitim ehad tavlin. He says, didn't I already ask him the question about a tavlin? And what did he answer me with the spice? Amar li, hanach letruma tavlin de Rabbanan. He said, look, that truma is de Rabbanan. Ha-chanami trumat yarak de Rabbanan. He could say the same thing here, that the truma on vegetables is de Rabbanan. Now that's a little strange, because the source said, yarak shel shvi'it, the yarak was the Shemitah, not the truma. The Shita Mekubetza basically explains here that what they're talking about is, they're really talking about the oil. The oil could be from something not olive oil. And therefore, the oil, he could answer the oil was rabbinic truma. Okay? Now, Rav Yosef answers back, you can't say that that's the answer. And Rava couldn't have answered that, because if it was trying to make a point in this Mishnah that Rabbi Shimon permits really only because it's rabbinic, well, then it should have made it very clear. How would it have made it more clear? Well, since vegetables aren't chayav in truma by Torah law, and olive oil is, then they shouldn't have used the oil of truma. They should have brought an example, right? It wasn't like an example that happened. They were just bringing random examples. So we have it should have brought in the opposite example. Yarak shel truma b'shemen shel shvi'it. It should have said the vegetable of truma with the oil of Shemitah. It should have reversed it. So it was obvious that they were talking about truma d'Rabbanan. So that's not a good answer. So Rabbi Yosef isn't satisfied with Abai's answer. When we're back to square one, why don't you ask Rava this question? To which Abai has a second response. This is going to have two parts, because we're going to have a response. Rabbi Yosef's going to question it, and then Ravina is going to come in and kind of support Abai. But in the end, we're going to be ending really with Rav Yosef, saying that Rav Yosef seems to think that it's a problem, though. And then we're going to kind of have, maybe there is an answer, but Rav Yosef wasn't really satisfied with that answer. So, answers Abai. V'lav mi'ot v'mimatnitin d'matir Rabbi Shimon v'amar li ti'yarev. Well, also, I questioned Rava from our Mishnah, because our Mishnah says, right, what does it say? Rabbi Shimon permits the asham that was mixed up with the shlamim. And what did he say? He said, well, they were already mixed. That's b'diavad. Hachanami di'yarev. He can say the same thing here. When we're talking about the oil, it says don't cook the oil of the truma with the vegetable of the shvi. Why is that? Because the oil is already mixed in. And now they're saying don't cook it. And Rabbi Shimon says, yeah, you can cook it because they already got mixed up together. And that's the case, where they were already mixed up. And then it becomes a b'diavad case. And that's how Abai answers the question according to Rava. He'll just say this was a post facto case, where it was already mixed up and there was nothing to do about it. Well, Rav Yosef is going to raise a problem, and this is going to have a few stages of trying to deal with this, which is Idi Yarev. If it was already mixed, my tamanei d'Rabbanan. Why then wouldn't the rabbis permit it? Remember our case on the Mishnah. If it was pieces of meat, right, the rabbis actually permit that because nothing you could do. But first, right, so now Abai answers at first, why did the rabbis forbid? In other words, basically Rav Yosef is going to say there's a bad answer because it doesn't make sense with the rabbi's position. It might explain Rabbi Shimon the way you want to explain Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon only permits post facto, and again, it's just Abai coming out to bat for Rava. It's not really Abai's approach himself. But if you can't explain it that way, like Rava, that it's post facto, because then the rabbi's position makes no sense. To which Abai says, what do you mean it makes no sense? What compared to the Mishnah? Mididavaya asham ushlamim. It's like the asham and shlamim that also is post facto and the rabbis forbid. But Rav Yosef says, no. It's not at all like that case. Because midame, remember what the difference between the first case and the second case in the Mishnah is. Hatami letakanta b're'iyah. The two animals who are alive, they have a solution. Wait till they get blemished, sell them, and buy new animals with them. But but in this case, the oil mixed already with the vegetables, there's nothing you can do about it. Halodami ela, it's much more similar, Rabbi Yosef says, to what? To the meat mixed with the meat that doesn't have a solution. And since there's no way to resolve it, you eat it, right? We treat it like the more severe. We allow you to eat it. And that's the rabbi's position. So saying that this is where it's already post facto and it can't be fixed, well, then the rabbis should permit it and the rabbis forbid it. So you can't really explain it that way. So Abai and Rabbi Yosef's conversation is done. But Ravina comes to pitch in for Abai and says, what do you mean? Matkiv la Ravina. Ravina questions Rabbi Yosef and says, Midami. It's not really like the chaticha shebachatichot. It's somewhere in between those two cases. And perhaps we can explain why the rabbis forbid it. There's no way to fix that problem because it's meat and meat and we don't know which is which. But here we have oil mixed up with a vegetable. Take it out, squeeze out the vegetable, get all the oil out. Okay, try this in your kitchen. I don't know if you'll succeed. It might depend on what kind of vegetable. But it's not very easy to get oil off of something. And that's really kind of what Rabbi Yosef's going to say. But he's going to raise more problems with trying to separate it. Even if you theoretically could, you're going to come into halachic problems. Rabbi Yosef, and this is, we're going to end with Rabbi Yosef and basically say that's why he didn't think that you could explain this case as being it's mixed in, because then you really can't explain the approach of the rabbis, because there really is no solution here. Because how are you going to get the oil out? And again, if there's no solution, it's going to be like chatichot, and the rabbis would actually permit. I'm sorry, if you really squeeze it really hard, what's the problem? Shemitah produce has sanctity to it, and you can't just destroy it. So kamafsi b'shvi, you're basically ruining Shemitah produce, and you can't do that. Nischo porta, right? You're not allowed to mash Shemitah produce. It's treating it without the proper respect, without the proper sanctity. Nischo porta, if you just take a little bit out, well, that's not going to help you because sof yeruv me'arev, well, you're still going to have a mixture, and then there really is no way to fix it. So basically, Rabbi Yosef still sticks to his gun, saying this would be a good question against Rava, and Abai and Ravina tried to answer. Whether we accept their answer or not, it's not so clear. Okay, Eitive, fourth and last question. Rabbi Shimon Omer, Lemochorat miviyashamo v'lugoimo. We're talking now about a suffix mitzorah, and this Mishnah is particularly talking about one of the korbanot that we need to bring. We're not sure if this person's a mitzorah or not, but we want to allow them to get out of their predicament of being, their situation of possibly being a mitzorah, a leper. So on the 8th day, after they finish this 7-day process, then on the 8th day, they're supposed to bring their sacrifices. One of the sacrifices they're supposed to bring is an asham, the guilt offering. Now you bring an asham, and with that you bring a log of oil, which is a measurement of oil, and then the Kohen takes it. If you remember, he sprays the oil, sprinkles it toward the parochet in the hechal, and then takes it and puts it on the ear and the hand and the finger, just like the blood of the leper. Okay, so he sprinkles 7 times, and then he puts it on in the sanctuary, and then he goes out, and then he puts it on the ear, the hand, and the finger and the toe. So l'machorat, on the 8th day, the suffix mitzorah, we're not sure if he's really a mitzorah, so it's going to be a similar situation that we saw before of like what you do when there's this doubt. He comes with his asham and lugoimo, v'omer, and he says the following: Im shel mitzorah, this is like a condition. If this person's a mitzorah, hareza ashamo v'zelugo, then this is his korban asham, and this is the log of shemen, and we're going to do everything the way we're supposed to, turning it out on a bet. V'im lav, and if not, asham zeh shel shalmei nedava, then we'll turn this korban, we'll say this is a voluntary shlamim offering. V'oto asham ta'un. Now, what's the rules about this? It's going to have the chumras of asham and shlamim. Oto asham ta'un shchita b'tzafon. You have to slaughter it in the north. Matam b'honot. You have to give the gifts, meaning the placements of the blood. Of the oil. Also of the blood, by the way, of the blood of the asham. Okay, you put it on the fingers and all that. Smicha, you do the smicha, the leaning on the korban, which is something specifically you do in a shlamim. So it's got the chumras of both. Nisachim, which is also by shlamim, you bring libations with it. And tufach hazev shok, you wave the thigh and the breast. And it's eaten in a day and a night. Now, what do you see here? This is Rabbi Shimon. This is what Rabbi Shimon says. And he says, right, we have this is lechatchila. We don't have to go ahead with this. We could just say, don't be purified. Okay, stay in your suffix situation. Well, that's going to be our answer. But right now, it seems like we're going to say no. And the answer is going to come from there in a second. But why don't we just leave him as a suffix leper? Because otherwise, we're bringing kodshim lebeit hapsul. It's a problem. To which the answer, no. And this is, again, an answer of Rava, tikune gavra shani. Here we want to fix a person's status. So it's true we want to bring kodshim lebeit hapsul, but not when there's some other thing pulling the other way, which is we have this person who's maybe a leper. We want to get him out of this situation, and therefore we're going to allow for something that we don't necessarily want to allow in other situations. But that's clearly a b'diavad situation. So that's how Rabbi Shimon allows it. So again, we have 4 difficulties against Rabbi Shimon from 4 different Mishnayot, trying to say that it seems that Rabbi Shimon really does permit it ab initio, and each time we kind of answered, other than that one that we didn't have an answer for, which was the Maser Sheni. Now we want to get off on a tangent here about the log shemen. What do we do with the oil? So Hasham, hatina Hasham. So I get how you do the korban Hasham with that condition. But log ma'ikal amemar, what are you going to do with that oil? So they say, what do you mean? You could say, Da'amar log ze yehene dava. You can bring oil as a voluntary offering in the temple. So you say, either it's a voluntary offering or it's for the mitzorah. But what's the problem? Well, dilma lav mitzorahu by mikmat. If he's not a mitzorah, then you bring in a dava, you actually have to do a kometz, which is you take a handful of the oil out and you have to burn it on the altar. So you have to do the kometz, the kmitza. So they say, okay, so do makametz, so do that and do the sprinkling. Well, that's a bit of a problem because dilma mitzorahu by matan sheva. Now, first it makes it sound like actually they just say, just do the kmitza and take the oil and then, I guess, go burn it, which we haven't gotten to yet. Then they say, no, because you need to do the sprinkling. Maybe he's a leper. In other words, again, if it's voluntary, then you do it that way. If he's a leper, you do it that way. So which one are you going to do? You're going to ignore that one? No, diyav. You're going to do both. You're going to take the kmitza, and we'll talk about the burning soon, and you're going to also sprinkle the blood by the parochet, and then put it on the ear and the nose, the ear and the finger and the toe of the leper. But they say, wait a minute. If you do the kmitza first, then you're taking some of the oil out of there, and then you don't have a log anymore, hachasrle, you're going to be missing. You're not going to have a log when you get to go to do the sprinkling. Well, demaite portu mamalele. You can just add to it. So in other words, take a kmitza out, fill it up to the log, take a kmitza out, then refill it. Okay, people do this at Leil HaSeder, when you take out the wine for Dam Tzvardei Akinim for all the 10 plagues, and then you fill it up again because now you have a cup that's not full that you're going to make a bracha on, right? When you make the bracha on the second cup, it's going to be empty, right, or somewhat empty. So people fill it up. Same thing here. And in fact, there's a Mishnah that says you could do that. It's not. Chaser halog ad shelo yatzak yimalenu. If you haven't yet done the pouring, so the sprinkling, so just fill it up. Okay, so we've got that. We do the kmitza, then we add a little more oil, and then we go do the sprinklings. Okay, but habai haktara, but it needs to be burned. So they say, okay, demaktole, so you burned it. Now we're going to have a bit of a problem because emat. At what stage are you going to burn it? So you do the kmitza, you do the sprinkling of the oil. When do you burn it? Before the sprinkling? After the sprinkling? So let's see what the issues are. If it's after the 7 sprinklings, now there's a rule here. It's really by a mincha, but it's the same thing by the oil. That if you take a kmitza out of something, or you take something from a mixture, and now there's a remainder, and before you take that kmitza and burn it on the altar, something happens to that remainder, and there's some of it gets lost, or all of it gets lost, or some of it gets lost. You actually can't burn what you took out from there because now the original is missing stuff. You can't burn it. So now you have a problem because if you first do the kmitza, then you sprinkle the oil, and then you want to burn it, it's too late. It's reduced in its amount, what was left there, and therefore you can't burn it on the altar. So the obvious would be, well, let's do it before you do the 7 sprinklings. Well, there's a pasuk that says, kosa or vidvash, okay, kosa or v'chol dvash, lo taktiru, you can't burn on the altar. And then it says, I just want to get the pasuk in its entirety, 1 second. Sorry. let me just find the pasuk. I should have had it out. But kol se'or v'chol dvash lo taktiru mimenu. It's Vayikra chapter 2, verse 11. Lo taktiru mimenu ishela Hashem. Don't burn from it. In other words, don't burn se'or and vash. You can't put chametz on the altar. You can't put honey on the altar. In ishela Hashem, burn it as something offering to God. But the drasha in this pasuk is that the lo taktiru goes in both directions. It's not just about the se'or and vash, but lo taktiru ishel Hashem. Lo taktiru, now it says mimenu ishel Hashem, from it. So what did they learn here? The drasha is, if you took from something, like this container, you had a log of shemen in this vessel, and you took some oil out of it, and you burned it, okay, which is what we're doing now. We took the oil, we burned it. You can no longer lo taktiru mimenu. You can't take from that remainder and burn it on the altar. That is a remainder. It cannot be burned on the altar. Now, what does this mean? So if you took the chnitza and you burned the oil on the altar, you can't take anything from that same vessel anymore, that log of oil, which is the log of oil that you brought for this, either it's this or that. You can't take from there, and now we're not burning it on the altar. We want to sprinkle it by the parochet. But that's like it's being offered on the altar. So you can't do that because it's shirayim, it's remainder, it's leftover. So it's a problem. So now we're stuck. But Amar of Yehuda Bereder Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi, last line for today, Demasik le l'shem eitzim. Well, you can actually put them on the altar for the sake of firewood. Because what? Titanya Rabbi Eliezer Omer, l'reach nichoch yatamale. You can't offer it up as an offering to God. But you can do it if you just need wood in the fire. So what does that have to do with this? This isn't wood in the fire. But what they're saying is, if it's really a voluntary offering, because you're not really a leper, then yes, you burned it on the altar, and you can't use the remainder for anything, but you're not using it for anything, because all you're doing is spraying it by the parochet, but you don't even need to, because you're not really a leper. So it's a meaningless action, basically. It's like throwing water. And if your first action was meaningless, because you're really a leper, then the first action isn't actually offering something up to God that's going to preclude you from doing something later. So you can actually do it. And that's how we do the oil, although we're going to still have some more questions on this tomorrow. We'll finish up with that after. So what did we do today? Very simply, two things. We started with Rabbi Shimon, and we dealt with Rabbi Shimon's opinion, and is it really Rava's explanation of Rabbi Shimon that it's only b'diavad, l'chatchila, he doesn't allow you to bring something l'beit hapsul. Abaye and Rav Yosef together raised 4 difficulties against Rava. Most of them were resolved. One was not really resolved, and one was semi-resolved. Then we had the last one had to do with this Asham Mitzorah, and then we wanted to know, okay, we figured out how you do the Asham, but how do you do the Log Shemen? And that was a total aside, just because we mentioned that. And with that, we went through all the details about how we actually do that. And with that, we finished for today. Wishing everyone Shabbat Shalom and Shavua Tov.